Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Keisha's Corner. My name is Lakeisha Charles with Charles Community Counseling Center. My disclosure statement. These next couple of sessions and last session, I talked about trauma. So if this may be a trigger for you, might not want to watch right now. So just a little disclosure there. I also am talking from 20 plus years of professional experience, but also personal experience. So this is my corner of just things I've experienced working with individuals and personal experience as well that I want to share, and hopefully it inspires someone, motivates someone, encourage someone, empower someone, or simply pass the information along to somebody else. But at the end of the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Alrighty. So I am continuing my series on trauma and the fact that it's hereditary. And so I wanted to explain some more of what that meant. Again, I gave a general overview last video as far as trauma being hereditary and what exactly trauma is, specifically post-traumatic stress disorder. Because a lot of individuals have experienced trauma, but how people respond to it is different. And so I kind of wanted to really dig deep this week and go into some of the genetics of trauma and how it truly impacts things. So like I said, I went over definitions of post-traumatic stress disorder, the textbook definition of it, and symptoms and whatnot. So go watch last week's video so you can get some knowledge on that. So I do have my notes in front of me, so I wouldn't miss a beat on there. Hence the reason I got my glasses on today, because I need them to read. Okay, so one of the things I want to touch base when I'm dealing with someone that has experienced trauma, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, um, happen to watch a killing or something like that, something very traumatic that was life threatening to themselves or to someone else. But one of the things I've done with clients is what's called a genogram. Okay, so a genogram is kind of like some ancestry type stuff. You know how we do our family tree, but usually our family tree is just connecting the dots of who's related to who, by who, and whatnot. A genogram digs a little bit deeper. A genogram is a display of your personal family relationships and medical history, as well as psychological history, behavioral patterns. But it looks for repeated patterns in your family. So I did this on my family one time. I actually had an assignment when I was in grad school. So this was a really long time ago, 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, about 18, 19 years ago, when I was in grad school, had an assignment to do a genogram. So I used the Thanksgiving holiday, because everybody was around that time, to ask some questions. And I was looking for patterns of behavior. I looked for patterns of substance use. I looked for patterns of psychological issues or behavioral problems, or marriages. The number of marriages people had in their lives and whatnot. How they communicated, how they managed their anger, how they raised their children, just the beliefs and whatnot that was passed down from one generation to another. One of the things I was also looking for was any patterns of abuse. So whether it was physical, emotional, sexual abuse. So any type of things we was looking for. I was looking for patterns of behavior, good or bad. Okay. So that's what a genogram is. It's a display of personal family relationships, medical history. It visualizes the hereditary traits, patterns, and psychological factors used to identify repetitive patterns of behavior and recognize hereditary tendencies. Okay, so a genogram. So usually when I do this with my clients, they're able to start seeing it. A lot of times we don't think about, we're asking like, why do I respond this way? Why do I, communicate this way? I don't get it. And I hear from so many people, that's just how I am. They just got to get used to it. But when we start really digging deep, we see that maybe that's how their parents communicated. Their grandparents or even great grandparents, if they know them, to be able to go back that far to get information. So I encourage, if you're seeing some repetitive patterns, and I've even seen with some families, even sexual abuse as well, a repetitive pattern one generation after another. And then we look at intergenerational trauma. So it's kind of like shared trauma. So it can be a group of individuals that shared a particular experience. We looked at slavery. You have mass numbers of individuals that experienced this, and it was traumatic. It was life threatening. Their lives were ended in some some situations and stuff. People lost their lives. People were enslaved to work for someone else that they weren't getting paid for under the worst conditions, taken from their homes, killed in mass amounts. You looked at situations like the Holocaust, same thing. People hoarded into one situation or one camp, these concentration camps, and killed in mass killings. And people witnessed this. And so trauma can be inherited because there are changes in our genetic structure. And when I say changing in your genetic structure, the trauma itself doesn't change your genes, but the trauma can affect how your genes respond, your DNA, how it responds to certain things. Okay. One of the things I was reading about years ago was like slavery, slaves that was coming in on the slave ships. And among African American communities, high blood pressure and diabetes on the rise. Like, okay, why is this so much? Do you realize that those that survived on the slave ships, their body was able to retain more water? Their body was able to retain salt, so they were able to survive a lot longer and everything. Hence, one of those individuals also had high blood pressure. So it saved them, but it's killing us today, unless we make some changes and change that DNA genetic makeup. Okay. So these are how some things, trauma can be passed down from one generation to another. So instead, it alters how our genes function. So the trauma doesn't change the gene or the DNA itself, but it changes how it functions. It changes how it responds. Because when trauma occurs, our bodies make a physiological change to handle the stress. So when you're under duress, your body will have a certain reaction. You hear the fight or flight moment. So basically, our body, oh my gosh, I always tell people our bodies were wonderfully and amazingly made by God to adjust and to handle certain situations. Our minds will go through it. So that fight or flight response, when your body feels you are in danger, is making a quick response to fight or take flight. It will rid itself of waste, anything that's going to hold it down to keep it from taking flight or fighting. Okay, your bodies adjust to that. Okay, our DNA will make the adjustments for any type of stress or trauma we are under. Now, the thing is, when our DNA and our genetic match changes up to adjust to this, especially if it's exposed for so long, that gets passed down to the next generation as well. Okay, so you have something called epigenetics. This is the study of the effects that environment and behavior has on our genes. So an ancestor's exposure to trauma might impact future generations. So it's not just the environment, it's our genetic makeup from my ancestors. Okay. Now, regarding the environment, remember I said before, when we're exposed to trauma, especially for a prolonged period of time, our minds click. Something changes. We get into survival mode, but everybody's response is different. Everybody's genetic makeup is different. Okay, some people are very resilient and challenge the negative thoughts that may come into their heads and can still function in life. And some individuals need a little extra assistance because the anxiety kicks in. They are in protective mode 24/7. I look at combat veterans. I shared with you guys before, I'm a veteran as well, wartime veteran at that. Okay, I did 1 year in Afghanistan. I may have not seen as much as other individuals seen, but there's certain things that will trigger a response and it reminds me of something, a sound. I live in the neighborhood where there's a lot of veterans in, and I can say 4th of July and New Year's Eve. I'm in a rural area, no city jurisdiction. There's a lot of fireworks that goes on my street, in my neighborhood. I cannot begin to explain what that sounds like for somebody who has served in a war zone, okay? But for somebody who is still in that mindset, it's different, you know? Somebody who may have not adjusted is different. It can trigger somebody to go back into that moment. And when a person triggers, one of the things that can go back to a person is suffering from post traumatic stress disorder, their mind literally can click back to the event itself as if they were there. That's scary for your mind to click back to that point. Dealing with veterans, especially those dealing with post traumatic stress disorder, wartime veterans, years ago, when you're looking at World War I, World War II, even Vietnam War, from the time a soldier goes from getting those orders to return home, there's some days, there's some time that passes where you have a little time to try to wind down before you back in your home environment. Today, and even when I was coming back, you can get orders today saying you're going to be going back home and you can be sitting at dinner with your family the very next day. You have no time to switch it off. There is no time to go from being in that war zone, constantly on guard, just we had to be locked and loaded at all times. And so you have no time to go from war mindset to back to civilian mindset. Within less than 24 hours, you are there, back at your dinner table with your family. No time to switch gears. And I've talked to individuals who are still in that mindset, and they may have been back home for years now, but they haven't learned how to switch it off yet. And that's a difficult situation. So you're talking about people who have dealt with all kinds of trauma, have seen all kinds of things based on how their genetic makeup is, too, may determine how they respond to it, how they adjust to it, how their body physiologically changes to that stress to adapt, and passing it on to generations. Now, environmentally, you may have the person who's still in that mindset. So they're constantly on guard, hyper vigilant, constantly watching over their shoulders, might be afraid to even go out in public situations, crowded situations, because of their history of trauma. May not be able to sleep or be in a quiet room. I've had individuals I've worked with, the quiet is too loud for them. Okay, they have to have some noise, whether it's white noise, rain, or something to sleep, because it blocks out all the other sounds that keeps them hyper vigilant. The anxiety levels up there. Okay, people putting headphones on to block out those things. These are individuals who are still mentally back there. Did you also know at the age, especially a child, at the age a child may experience a trauma, physically your body is still growing, you've become an adult, you may have married and had children, but mentally your mind is stuck. So I encourage you to get assistance, talk to someone. Treatment options available for someone that has dealt with trauma is exposure therapy. It's one. That's where you slowly expose someone to some particular issue, or depending on the type of trauma they may have experienced, slowly in a safe environment, because it's changing the mindset to let them know this can happen, but you're safe. Or cognitive reconstruction. You are literally challenging the thought processes associated with that trauma. Okay, so somebody going into a crowded area, exposure goes up, they may become aggressive and not wanting to, it's just something clicks in them. Okay, and so exposing them or helping to change their thought process as far as what is safe. Is there real threat and danger in the situation? It can be something as simple as going into a grocery store in a crowded area. Okay, that can trigger someone that has been exposed to so much trauma. You'd be surprised. And they don't know necessarily what they're doing, or they have no control over how they're responding to it, because something clicks up here and their mind goes back. Okay, so I just want to encourage you, get the help you need for whatever type of trauma you may have experienced, whether it's personal trauma, whether it's somebody that you may have known that experienced some trauma, a direct relative, close friend, a close loved one that may have, experienced trauma or died tragically. If you were that person as that young child that experienced trauma, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever type of thing that was life threatening for you, go back and rescue that little girl. Go back and rescue that little boy. You have to go back to the time that you experienced that trauma to rescue that person and bring them forward mentally. You may have grown up. You're a grown man. You're a grown woman now. But mentally, you might be still stuck. So let's go back and rescue that person. Bring them back. You can't do it by yourself. You know, some people can, but I have a feeling there are people that are watching this video that might be still stuck. You don't have to do it by yourself. Get the help you need to get professionally, a close, trusted person that you can talk to that's okay with you unloading. There's professionals that get paid for you to unload and help unravel all that stuff that's going on up here. You know, reach out. Don't do it by yourself. Go back and rescue that person that's back there. All right. Thank you and welcome back to Keesha's Corner. I was about to say Children's Corner, but welcome back to Keesha's Corner. And I hope you come back for the next lesson. Take care.